The headlines screamed burnout and breakdown. Elvis Presley late again, holed up in Graceland, barely speaking. But behind the glare of neon signs and the roar of audiences lay a deeper silence he could not escape. Dusk draped the yard in violet shadows as Lisa Marie sat on the grass, her small fingers pressed to a jagged scratch on her forearm. She trembled, eyes fixed on the sprawling oak where he'd first held her hand. A distant strain of "Can't Help Falling in Love" drifted from the house, but it only deepened the hush around her. Elvis's voice, low and raw with worry, broke the stillness. "Where is that boy?" In that single whisper lay the secret no tabloid dared print. That his darkest sorrow wasn't missing notes on stage, but a child's brave heart he'd struggled to save. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. Elvis slowed the Cadillac's cruise down to a crawl as they turned off Humes Avenue and into the leafy cul-de-sac where Graceland's manicured lawns gave way to the sprawling green of Shelby Farms Park. It was a rare delight, and a rare risk, for him to walk that path without a phalanx of bodyguards or the glare of floodlights trailing his every move. He wanted Lisa Marie to feel the world beyond gilded gates, the scent of drying grass, the laughter of children on the swings, the promise of an ordinary Sunday afternoon. He killed the engine beside a lonely picnic table, shaded by an ancient oak. The air carried a hint of smoke from backyard grills and the first crisp edge of autumn. The sky above was a pale, prismatic blue, as if someone had spilled watercolors across the horizon. He reached over and unlatched Lisa Marie's car seat, lifting her out gently. She wobbled on her little legs, hair still damp from an impromptu fountain splash, and smiled up at him, eyes bright with delight, cheeks flushed rose pink. In that moment, his exhaustion melted away. They strolled along the park's winding paths, John Lennon's "Imagine" humming in his mind as he twirled Lisa Marie by her elbows, lifting her a hair's breadth off the ground. At the playground, she scrambled up the ladder to the slide, arms pumped with joyous abandon. He sat on a nearby bench, watchful and content, tucking his dark hair beneath the brim of his fedora. With each chime of her delighted shrieks, he felt his own heart lighten, like he'd rediscovered a part of himself lost to neon lights and roaring crowds. Suddenly, his cell phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He snagged it and frowned at the screen. Parker. He held a thumb over the voicemail icon, eyes briefly clouded by the impossible demands that perpetually awaited him. He stepped behind a bandstand for a few privacy-stolen seconds, listening to the colonel's clipped instructions about a sudden schedule change in Vegas. Elvis's jaw tightened. He slipped the phone off without a word and tucked it back in. Moments later, a sharp yelp split the afternoon air. He froze, scanning the playground. A large Doberman, its coat gleaming obsidian, even from a distance looked menacing as it lunged toward a small cluster of swing-set poles. A boy's scream followed. "Dad!" The Doberman's leash had come undone, and it barreled straight for Lisa Marie, who froze mid-slide, her face draining of color. Elvis's protective instincts ignited. He bolted from his bench, hat flying, and barreled toward the chaos. But before he could reach her, another figure blurred into motion. A thin boy, perhaps 10 years old, dressed in a faded gray sweater several sizes too large, raced across the grass, legs pumping with surprising speed. He planted himself between the dog and Lisa Marie, arms thrown wide. The animal smashed into the boy's makeshift shield, teeth flashing. The boy sank to the ground under the impact, knocking the wind from his lungs. Time slowed. Elvis heard the boy's body thud on the mulch, heard Lisa Marie's frantic cry, "No!" and smelled the dog's hot breath as it bounded away, leash finally snagging on a swing post. Elvis reached them in 2 strides, his heart pounding with primal rage and terror. The boy lay motionless, sweatshirt riding up to reveal a dark bruise spreading across his ribs. Lisa Marie flung herself to her knees, hands hovering helplessly above his chest. "Elvis!" she wailed, voice cracking. "Daddy, help him!" He knelt beside the boy, unbuckled his jacket and pressed it over the wound. "Sir!" he barked at a stunned bystander who held the dog's leash now. "Call 911!" His voice, usually a velvet drawl, rang with authoritative command. The world blurred, the brown mulch, Lisa Marie's tear-slick face, the distant honk of cars slowing. "No," the boy croaked, eyelids fluttering. His eyes, glassy with pain, found Elvis's. I didn't want her." His voice trailed off as the siren grew near. Elvis slid an arm under the boy's shoulders, lifting him gently as paramedics arrived. Lisa Marie stood, small and tremulous, clinging to her father's leg. He swept her into his arms for a moment, whispering, "You're safe." Then he guided her back to a safe distance, all the while stealing glances at the wounded boy, now wrapped in a stretcher's white sheet. The paramedics worked swiftly, voices low but urgent. Elvis hovered at the edge of the circle, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jaw clenched as though bracing against a gale. Lisa Marie buried her face in his shoulder, trembling. He stroked her hair, voice quiet as he whispered truths he barely believed. "He's strong. The doctors will help him." As the ambulance doors closed, Elvis pressed a determined hand against his forehead, breathing past the knot in his chest. The world he had so carefully shielded her from had pierced their idyll with violence, and a boy's sacrifice. He hoisted his fedora back onto his head, squarely on his brow, and glared at the retreating siren lights against the park's fading foliage. In that instant, he knew his life would never be the same, and neither would Lisa Marie's. The crowd of onlookers parted as Elvis stood, shoulders rigid and eyes glistening with unshed tears. He leaned close to Lisa Marie, his voice solemn. "Come on, Angel," he said, hand warm on her back. "Let's get you home." The fog of shock hovered over the park as they walked away. Father and daughter bound by fear and love, stepping beyond the playground's emptiness toward a new chapter neither had asked for. And as the ambulance's siren faded into the distance, Elvis Presley felt the weight of a promise stirring in his chest. He would protect life on and off the stage, come what may. The fluorescent tubes in the pediatric emergency ward buzzed faintly, casting a pallid glow over the silent rows of beds. It was well past midnight, yet Memphis Children's Hospital lay under siege by sleeplessness. The quiet hiss of oxygen, the distant beeping of monitors, the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes on vinyl. Down a narrow corridor, behind double doors marked intensive care, Elvis Presley stood as still as a statue, watching a stretcher glide into the bay. They'd rushed that frail boy, the one who'd thrown himself between the Doberman and Lisa Marie, straight here, wheels squeaking, sirens cut short at the hospital entrance. Elvis hovered in the shadows just outside the curtained cubicle where the boy lay, chest rising and falling under a sheet, face pale as plaster. He stared at the tight line of the boy's jaw, the dark bruise blooming on his ribs, recalling the thud that had lifted all the air from his lungs. A nurse slipped from the adjacent bay, pushing a clipboard against an elbow. She glanced at Elvis's broad-shouldered silhouette, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "Mr. Presley, he's stable for now, but his injuries are serious. Rib fractures, possible punctured lung. We need to keep him under observation. He's alone, really." Mother died some months ago, and his grandfather's been caring for him as best he can. Elvis swallowed hard. He had expected gratitude, perhaps stunned fear, but not this. He nodded once, voice caught in his throat. "Please," he began. If anyone asks, tell them he was brought in by an anonymous Good Samaritan. No press, no cameras. I don't want a circus." The nurse, weary from 100 urgent requests, nodded. Understood. She brushed past him, the snap of her uniform crisp as she disappeared down the hall. Elvis remained by the curtain, hand flat against the cool steel frame, peering at the boy whose small chest was now steadied by tubes and the faint hiss of respirator masks. Behind him, the muted footfalls of Lisa Marie approached. He turned as she gently tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide with shock. Her voice quivered. "Daddy, is he going to die?" He knelt to her level on the edge of the bed bay, reaching for her hand. His gaze flicked back to the unconscious child, and he felt the weight of helplessness swell. He closed his eyes, searching for words. But no fatherly platitudes would save this boy. He exhaled, stifling the tremor in his throat. He began, voice low and raw. He squeezed her hand. "I don't know, Sunshine, but they're doing everything they can." Lisa Marie's lower lip quivered, and she leaned against him, her small frame white beneath the hospital glow. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, heart pounding as if he, too, lay on that stretcher. Later, after dark had deepened into the earliest hours of dawn, Elvis stepped into a hushed office behind the hospital's administration wing. The walls were lined with brochures and property deeds, but tonight they felt like a courtroom. He closed the door softly and seated himself behind a polished oak desk. Across from him sat his personal attorney, a stoic man in a dark suit, whose expression signaled the gravity of their meeting. Elvis slid a check across the desk. Not a donation, he insisted, but an instruction. Find everything on this boy. Medical files, guardianship facts, any support programs available. I want full access to his care. Quietly. He spoke with the precision of a man issuing a direct order. The velvet drawl replaced by unvarnished resolve. The attorney placed the check in a desk drawer and nodded, already dialing his secure line. "It will be handled, sir." Elvis rose and smoothed the lapel of his jacket. "No publicity," he repeated, eyes flicking to a small window where the night lights of Memphis twinkled. "Not for me. Only for him." By the time he returned to the ward, Lisa Marie had dozed in a vinyl chair. He crouched beside her, brushing a stray curl from her temple. Her pale face, framed by hospital linens, looked too fragile. He looked up at the curtained bay again. No more paramedics, just the steady beep of the monitor. He pressed a finger to the wall panel, adjusting the blue lamp to a softer glow. The harsh white light retreated, leaving the bay warm as if in a child's bedroom. Then, very softly, he sang 2 lines from "Bridge Over Troubled Water" into the hush. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will ease your mind. The tune slipped through the air like a benediction. Lisa Marie stirred, blinking up at the sound of her father's voice, hushed but sure. He didn't glance at her. His focus remained on the boy behind the curtain. "Just rest," he whispered to Lisa. She snuggled closer, comforted by the familiar melody. He closed his eyes as he sang, each note a pledge to stand guard over that small life until she awoke to smile. When the last refrain fell silent, he rose, brushing hospital lint from his suit. He placed a gentle kiss on Lisa Marie's forehead and slipped from the ward, leaving the curtain closed around the sleeping child. In the empty corridor, the distant hum of the night nurse's station and the whisper of his own footsteps were the only witnesses to his vow to guard that boy's breath as vigilantly as he protected every note of his own song. Elvis sat behind the massive mahogany desk in his private Graceland study, the late morning sun filtering through heavy drapes and throwing warm stripes across the polished surface. The room smelled of lemon polish and aged leather, an atmosphere of careful order he had seldom felt free enough to disturb. Today, though, order itself would bend to necessity. He leaned back in the high-backed chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Before him lay a single sheet of paper. Clinical details on the boy who'd saved Lisa Marie, sent by the hospital under strict confidentiality. Elvis traced the typed lines, each statistic a weight in his chest. Multiple fractured ribs, a partially collapsed lung, a long road of rehabilitation. He folded the paper once, then twice, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He reached for the intercom. "Carl," he said, voice low but resolute. "Assemble everyone in the conference room. Now." Minutes later, in a sparsely furnished room adjoining the jungle room, Elvis waited as his closest advisors filtered in. His personal attorney, the colonel's right-hand man, his financial controller, crisp in a gray suit, and Jerry Schilling, his longtime friend, whose calm eyes now bore a flicker of concern. No cameras, no press. These walls would witness plans, not publicity. Elvis stood as the attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Presley," he began, "we've secured the necessary funding. The trust agreement is drafted, tax-exempt status, board members, initial capital infusion. You're prepared to endow it at half of last year's concert profits?" Elvis nodded, shoulders squared. "Make it effective immediately. I want it named, simply, the Quiet Hero Foundation. No names attached." His voice carried the weight of his promise. "Funds go to children who risk their own safety for others. Medical, educational support, long-term care." Jerry leaned forward. "That's unprecedented, Elvis. You're committing millions. And you'll keep it hidden?" He met Jerry's gaze without flinching. "Anonymous philanthropy. No press release. No benefit concerts. Just a record in the Foundation's filings. It's about them, not me." His attorney nodded, making a note. "All right. We'll handle the trust documentation and compliance. You'll need to sign here and here." He slid 2 pens across the table. Elvis hesitated only a moment before scrawling his signature. Each line felt like a stone laid in a private monument. When he finished, he rose, flattening his jacket against his frame. "Good. Let's move on." That afternoon, Elvis slipped behind the wheel of his black Cadillac and drove without fanfare to the modest bungalow where the boy's grandfather lived. The house sat on a quiet block, battered siding and a sagging porch swing the only sign of life. No flashbulbs, no entourage, just the man whose only priority was his grandson. Elvis knocked on the narrow screen door. From inside came the sound of slow shuffling. The door opened to reveal a stooped man, face lined with years of hard work and loss. His eyes widened at the sight of Elvis Presley on his porch. "Mr. Presley," the man said gruffly, "I wasn't expecting you." Elvis stepped forward, removing his fedora. "I wanted to speak in person," he said, voice measured, "about your grandson." The older man closed the door behind him and led Elvis inside. The living room was spare. Threadbare couch, a single lamp, a Catholic rosary draped over a photograph of the boy's mother. They settled across from each other, a coffee table between them bearing 2 chipped mugs. Elvis poured from a thermos, offering the first to the grandfather. He accepted with a curt nod. The coffee was strong, bitter as necessity. "Sir," Elvis began, I'm setting up a foundation to cover your grandson's medical bills, schooling, whatever he needs. It's anonymous, no headlines. I want him to grow up secure, not in debt or shame." The grandfather's jaw tightened. He stared into his mug, silence stretching like an ache. "I don't want charity from no rock star," he said finally, voice low. His knuckles whitened on the table's edge. "We do what we can. I don't want my name in no papers, and I sure don't want his needs broadcasted." Elvis nodded, leaning forward. "It's not charity. It's gratitude for what he did. Heroism isn't a spectacle. It's a quiet thing. He deserves that respect." The older man's gaze flicked up, eyes narrowing as he measured the sincerity in Elvis's tone. He thought of his grandson's courage, the boy's frail arms shielding a little girl from harm. He felt the truth in Elvis's words, a truth stronger than his pride. "I'll do it," he said at last, voice gruff but resolved. "But on one condition." He paused, lifting his mug. "No glory for me or him. It stays between us." Elvis reached across and pressed the man's forearm lightly. "Agreed." Back at Graceland that evening, Elvis walked through the quiet halls, mind eased of its heaviest burden. In his study, he retrieved the letter he'd forged earlier that day, an announcement outlining the Foundation's mission, ready to be tucked away in legal safes, unseen by the public eye. He placed it alongside Sarah's drawing on his desk, a child's simple sketch of wings unfurled, flying toward a shining sun. He stared at the image and the correspondence, connecting them across the gulf between suffering and hope. The boy's sacrifice, Lisa Marie's tears, the grandfather's quiet acceptance. These moments formed the mosaic of what true heroism meant. Elvis cradled the drawing in his hands, fingertips tracing the crude pencil lines. He whispered, "This one's for you," before turning to his guitar tucked in the corner. He raised it, strummed a soft chord, then sang the first stanza of a new song, one unrecorded, unsullied by ambition. "Brave hearts beat in silent days, unsung beneath the world's bright rays. But I will lift your name above, in whispered prayers of quiet love." In the hush of his mansion, his voice carried across rooms meant for gilded glamour. Here, in the stead of applause, it found its greatest echo, in the unspoken gratitude of those whose lives he had vowed to protect. And in that private concert, Elvis Presley discovered a truth greater than any stage, that the quiet heroism of a single child could ignite a legacy of compassion far brighter than any spotlight. The ballroom's opulent chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the gathered guests, philanthropists in velvet and silk, their muted conversations drifting like gentle eddies in the still air. The high ceiling arched above, frescoed with allegorical scenes of charity and light, while the walls bore tapestries of mythic heroes offering aid to the helpless. In the center of the great hall sat a long dais, draped in ivory linen, and accented with small, unadorned bouquets of white orchids, chosen, Elvis had insisted, for their purity rather than their pomp. The Quiet Hero Foundation's inaugural gala had been billed as an intimate evening, but the guest list read like a who's who of Memphis society. Bankers, civic leaders, and a handful of international dignitaries. Yet, none of these figures drew more attention than the man in the simple black suit standing at the podium. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had returned not as a superstar arrayed in rhinestones, but as a steward of compassion, his voice carrying through the hush with solemn clarity. He tapped the microphone once, and the room fell utterly silent. The clinking of ice in water glasses faded to stillness, His dark hair glinted under the chandelier's lamplight, and his eyes, usually alight with showmanship, now held a quiet intensity. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice resonant and unadorned, "tonight we stand to honor a different kind of heroism, one that doesn't seek the spotlight." He paused, letting the words sink in. It's easy to stand tall on a stage with an audience's roar as your refuge, but it takes something more to stand in harm's way for another person. No cameras, no cameras, no applause. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some moved, some surprised by his restraint. Elvis continued, "This foundation exists not to glorify, but to support the brave hearts among us, to ensure that a child who risks everything for a stranger has every chance to live a full life." He nodded to the left, where a slender boy in a charcoal gray suit sat beside Margaret Rhodes, who wore a simple navy dress. The boy's ribs remained subtly outlined beneath his shirt, a testament to his ordeal. He lifted his gaze to meet Elvis's and offered a small, resolute smile. The boy's presence was a silent testament to the Foundation's mission. Elvis drew a deep breath, scanning the faces before him. "When I first heard this child's story," he said, voice thickening, "I was reminded that the true measure of a person isn't how many times they stand in victory, but how bravely they face the fall. He showed me that heroism lives in the quiet moments we choose to protect one another." The applause began softly, first a respectful clap, then building into a standing ovation that rose like a wave, but moderated in tone, as though each hand that struck another was offering a benediction rather than celebration. Elvis bowed his head, gratitude and sorrow mingling in his eyes, before raising a hand to quiet the assembly. "Before we conclude, there is one more gesture I wish to honor," he said. At a signal, Margaret stood and placed a small, folded drawing on the table in front of Elvis. A hush fell once more as he carefully unfolded it. Scrawled in colored pencil was the image of a girl with outstretched arms beside a tall figure in a black suit, wings arcing behind them, both under a star-speckled night. At the bottom, in a child's careful hand, "Thank you for standing with me." Elvis's lower lip trembled. He looked at the boy, whose chest swelled with pride at his own work. Turning back to the audience, Elvis's voice broke. This is worth more than any record, any trophy. It's proof that kindness leaves its mark in ways no photograph can capture." He refolded the drawing, gently slipping it into an inner pocket. Then, without another word, he bowed and stepped away from the microphone. The orchestra rose to play "If I Can Dream," its strings weeping softly in an elegy of hope. Rather than lead the conventional encore, Elvis turned and walked down the dais, each step deliberate, his silhouette framed by the song's swelling chords. In the reception area, he paused at the edge of the hall, catching sight of Lisa Marie, who stood by the double doors, clutching his hand. She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Daddy," she whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore. Good always wins." His throat tightened as he nodded, wiping a tear from his cheek before it could fall. He ruffled her hair, pressing her close, then released her hand to step out into the night, leaving the soft glow of the ballroom behind. No flashbulbs popped, no notifications trailed him, only the muted echoes of gratitude drifting through the marble halls. As he slipped into the waiting Cadillac, the folded drawing still warm in his pocket, Elvis Presley carried with him the quiet legacy of a little boy's selfless act, a reminder that the most profound transformations often begin not with a roar, but with a simple, unnoticed gesture of courage and love.